Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and we're joined today. Our guest is Ean Price Murphy. She is the founder of Moxie Bookkeeping and Coaching. She founded the company in 2003 to work with creative businesses and nonprofits. So, Ean, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
I am doing really well. It's Ian with an E. Is that a mistake people often make then?
No, I think people ask me a lot of times, is that short for anything? Or what's the origin of that? Or how do you say that? Hippie parents is my excuse.
Just being different?
Yeah, my sister got named after both of my grandmothers. So they're, what were they going to do with me?
They found something unique.
Exactly.
Unique. Okay. So we'll dive right in, and we'll talk more about your business and bookkeeping and maybe some mistakes in that realm. But we always like to start off with a personal story. Ian, what's your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake, one of the biggest events and mistakes in my life, and kind of where everything else came from, was believing the advice that I was given without question, specifically financial advice, specifically work hard and you will succeed, follow the passion and the money will come. And in my case, working as hard as I could and trying to create a life around that without having any financial literacy led me to bankruptcy.
Oh, no.
And yeah, that was brutal. I can smile about it now because I'm way on the other side of it. That happened in my mid-20s, and I'm really glad it happened young, and I'm really glad it happened to me personally and not through a business. But it definitely started me on the path that I'm on now, and I would never have gotten where I am without it.
So we can maybe dig into some of the details of your story there, but you maybe this is kind of intertwined. The founding of Moxie, that was not your initial career path, right?
I would say it was my initial career path because I didn't have a career. That was part of the financial issue was, I always thought I wanted to be a teacher. And then I did my senior internship at a last stop high school in New York City. And I just was like, whoops.
And by last stop, you mean is this like kids who have gotten in trouble at other schools? That was their last
kids who have been thrown out of regular high schools. And this is the last stop for them before they drop out or go to jail or pass away. So it, for a young, idealistic suburban girl, it was way too much. I just did not have any of the emotional armor that I needed. I did not have good boundaries around, tough things. I felt completely out of my depth and unable to serve in the way that I wanted to. And so I sort of thought about teaching in a couple of different arenas. I tried middle school. You can imagine how that went. I tried.
That takes Moxie.
Oh boy, yeah, more than I had. So the last teaching attempt that I tried was adult ed, and that was really fun. But in order to get my certification, they said I had to go back and take college typing, and I was like, I'm not.
Right.
So from there, I sort of had this wandering, so let's just start with teachers don't get paid well, and fake teachers who are not certified and are just sort of in the system to maybe be a teacher someday get paid even less. So that was definitely like cross off, follow your passion and the money will come. If you're a teacher, you can just kiss that one goodbye.
Yeah.
And so I sort of tried to figure out what else to do. And so I was, bartending at night and temping during the day and picking up odd shifts here and there. But when you live in a city that's expensive, it's really hard even when you know what you're doing to make a living. And I just, again, hadn't been really taught how to see the problems before they were problems, right? I thought I just needed to work harder. I thought I just needed to pick up another shift. I thought I just needed to hustle more for tips. And that was almost true. It is, as I discovered, incredibly expensive to be poor, that you can kind of bump along okay as long as nothing bad happens. But things always happen, right? There's a slow night at the bar and you don't get any tips, or, the power goes out at your building and you got to skip work for that, or a roommate skips out on a phone bill, or you have to change apartments or change jobs. And so, within a few years, just by putting living expenses on my credit card to make up for the shortfall of what I didn't have each month, I grew tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt with insane interest rates. And I, tried all sorts of 6 months, 0% financing and shifting things around and paying off what I could. And, I just didn't have the information that this is never going to work. You just don't. You live in a financial drought. You're not bringing in enough to ever make this work. And it took a bankruptcy for me to be able to see that truth. And that was when I sort of was like, well, maybe I shouldn't work for other people anymore. Maybe I should work for myself and set my own wage.
Now, did having the personal bankruptcy on your record create any problems with starting a business and getting started? Or was that just, that was a good pathway to financial, at least stability, if not success?
Yeah. So, because of the kind of business that I started, I just started as a freelance bookkeeper and was on my own for the first few years. I was able to very quickly, and thankfully, bookkeeping is a pretty sought after, everybody knows they need a bookkeeper, right? It's not a hard sell. So I was able to fill up a client roster really quickly and, charge what I needed to charge to get by. And that was such a huge shift. I was making almost 3 times as much as I was working for someone else. And that allowed me to, stabilize, save, and plan. And that just was a huge difference. And what sort of transitioned me from freelance to being a business owner was, I worried that it was just me. And so again, even though I now have financial stability, if I get sick, again, all of these what ifs, that wasn't going to carry me through 6 months of not working. And so I was like, I need one level up of stability. I need my income not to be dependent on my time.
Yeah. So at what point did you transition from freelancing to having a company, building a team?
Yeah, so that was when we actually became Moxie. So I was just freelancing as myself, and had a friend of mine from the West Coast who her dad was a CPA, and I had more clients than I could really manage effectively and knew that I needed to get somebody. And she ended up coming on the team. She's still with us more than 10 years later, 15 years later. She's been with us a while now. So I hired her, I think, in 2005. So there was a little period in there where I kind of, knew that was what I was going to do. And then we got an employee and kept growing. And now there's 15 of us. So, yeah, slow and steady.
Yeah. So I think, one reflection question on, mistakes, you framed it as, following that advice of follow your passion, money will come. Was the mistake not, so what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the mistake was not pursuing your own path sooner as a freelancer and then starting the company? If you could go back in time, which obviously we can't, would you have started that instead of temping and bartending?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, again, that's why it's sort of my favorite mistake is it's one of the ones where it's like, I don't know that I would change anything because then I wouldn't be where I am. And I don't think following the advice was wrong. I don't think it's bad advice. I think it was wrong to follow it unquestioningly. To think that was that was an immutable truth rather than a philosophy.
Or at least one philosophy.
Or at least one philosophy.
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, I think the way that I ended up working it out was finding my passion in what made me money, because again, I think that part of the reason that I really love what I do is because I've managed to weave teaching deeply into it. I'm not a bookkeeper that just shows up, does, and then leaves. I want to talk about it with you. I want to make sure you understand. I want to make sure you know what to do next. And we do a lot of software setup and training. And I really love that part of watching people say, oh, that's actually not that hard. With a couple pieces of information, those were the keys that I needed to start the bookkeeping car. And now I can drive it around on my own. And I just love those little moments where people realize they know way more than they thought they did, or that they're much better at something that they just assumed they would never know.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you can do the teaching. Do you end up, as you're working with clients, is there any overlap between giving business coaching, anything into the realm of how that affects personal finance?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. And part of that reason is if your business isn't doing well, likely you are borrowing from yourself and jeopardizing your personal finance. And if you don't have okay spending habits in your personal life, likely you're going to be draining your business. And I had a client that I had to stop working with because he had a fantastic business. He was making tons of money and had a great team beneath him that were really underpaid, and they knew it. And, but he was saying, I don't have any money left. He was taking home $350,000 a year and felt broke. And that was because his partner, his wife, felt like they needed to be living a lifestyle that was not what they could afford. And so, they had 2 kids and they were just, going for all of the everythings. And so she would just rack up a huge credit card bill, and then he would have to take from the business to pay it. And
yikes.
Yeah. So, so he was sort of asking me if I could step in and mediate that.
Oh, that's a different realm of counseling.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was like, that's marital therapy. That's not bookkeeping, right? So I mean, I'm happy to give her the information, but I feel like you've probably already given it to her, and what her behavior suggests is that she's not interested in changing. So, I can only really help you with the business stuff, but even that, until you have this figured out, I don't think it's worth your paying me to tell you stuff you already know and aren't going to do anything about.
Yeah. And if thinking of the context of you and Moxie and your business, if you are busy enough to pick and choose to an extent who you're working with, that's a good position for you or for any business to be in.
And that is for sure where I will lean into follow your passion and the money will come. Is if I were to work with people that I don't like, I might as well be working for someone else.
Yeah.
So I just have a hard and fast rule that I don't work with people that who treat me like the help, or who don't respect their time or my time or their money. I can't care more about your business than you do. Even if I like you as a person, that's just a deal breaker for me. And I'd rather not have that client and make room for the possibility of the right client than be a little fearful and say, well, I don't have anybody to replace you, so let's just keep doing this.
Yeah. And that can drag you down personally or drag your business down. Like there's an author I'm thinking of, Michael Port, who wrote a book called Book Yourself Solid, if you're familiar with that book. And that's one of the points he makes, is like sketching out your ideal client in different dimensions, including kind of on a personal level, who are you energized by? Who do you like working with? Because you're more likely to be successful, and then you get word of mouth referrals, which is the cheapest form of marketing. So there's something to be said for that, but you have to be in that position where you can pick and choose. And there are times, me personally, some people that I've worked with, where you feel pressured to take work because, well, it's work.
Yeah.
And you do have to be careful about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of those things where you just have to look at it at a case by case basis. If it is a short-term project that you know has an end date and you have a very strong contract and scope of work, okay. But 9 times out of 10, the work that you take that's not an ideal client, there's a reason you didn't want to take them. And they often end up using more of your energy and not being a profitable project.
Yeah.
So, again, you got to do what you got to do. But those are the moments to really make sure that you are as solid and clear as possible with all of your boundaries around scope of work when you can call me, not 2 a.m. on a Saturday kind of a thing, because clients will do that. Not all of them, but, the ones that are desperate to find you are desperate for a reason.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back, we talk more about your business and Moxie and some of the approach, but, going back to what you were talking about earlier, 2 things come to mind. One is, the idea of hustle culture. I don't know if I don't think you use that exact phrase. There's been, in some circles, a backlash to that, maybe to the point you were making of, we can preach work harder, but that might work for some. That doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, right? Any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the whole sort of hashtag grind, hashtag hustle, side hustle, just like the sort of advice platitudes. It's not wrong. It's just we shouldn't take that unquestioning, right? Why are you, if it's, a short term, I'm going to really put my back into it for 3 months so that I reach this objective, and I'm very sure that I can, great, go for it. But if you live in this state of anxiety and stress, like A, you are literally killing yourself, and B, what are you losing? Sleep, family, relationships, time, money. To me, it's not worth it most of the time. I do not glorify the grind. Yeah. I understand that it is necessary from time to time, but, and I do think we're sort of moving away from that as a culture. The 80s, 90s was all about oh, dude, I only got 2 hours of sleep last night. I was grinding so hard. And I don't hear that as much anymore, other than from, some very visible business leaders,
right,
who I think have a very effective chemical imbalance. They've got this, I only need to sleep 2 hours a night weirdness about them. And that's cool. Mine's the opposite. I like to sleep 14 hours a night if I can.
I think I still do see more profiles of entrepreneurs or business people. The article's more likely to say something about how they're up at 4 a.m. and they're in the gym by 4:17 every morning and very little sleep. I can't remember reading a profile about an entrepreneur or executive, and they must be out there, given just variation in people and how they operate, of somebody who prioritizes getting a good 7 hours of sleep a night. And they find ways to be effective instead of bragging about how many hours they work.
Yes. For sure that's true. And I don't know, again, whether that's just the people that are being profiled or there was a nonprofit I worked with and the executive director there was a woman who really only needed 2 hours of sleep a night. She was up and effective 22 hours a day. And I just was like, wow. Of course she's successful. She's got 3 times longer in a day than the rest of us does. But, I have all sorts of thoughts and opinions about, why and wherefore, et cetera. I think the thing that's important for me to remember is not to let anyone else tell me what success should look like. For me, success is getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night and waking up in time to take my dog out on a walk. And I do like going to the gym in the morning because that helps my day go better, but I want to be done at a certain time and I really want my life, right? I'm definitely a work to live kind of person, not a live to work. So Is that why I didn't make the 40 under 40 list? Yeah, probably. I'm okay with that, right? My bills are paid. I have a beautiful home that I love. I feel like the things that I want to go do, I can. I have enough that I, am able to support the causes and charities that I like, both in a consistent monthly way as well as when something urgent pops up. I feel no lack in my life. I can't imagine a better, definition of success than that.
Yeah, that's great. One other thing you mentioned earlier about following your passion reminds me, one of my favorite movies ever is Office Space. Are you an Office Space fan?
I am a fan. I've never really worked in a cubicle, so a lot of it I just was like, that looks horrible. Why would people do that for a living? But yes, it was very funny.
I tried Cubicle Land for a while. I am thankfully out of Cubicle Land for a decade now. But Peter Gibbons, who's not happy with his job, he's talking to his next door neighbor who's like a construction worker, and you guys talk about following your passion, and one of them says like, "No, man, that's BS. Like the garbage man, nobody would ever become a garbage man."
And we definitely need garbage men.
And we do, and so I think it's tough because this is not to get too philosophical, but there can be dignity in all work, and hopefully organizations and society can help create that. But I feel at times personally really blessed that I do get to follow passions, as you put it, following a passion that also makes a living. And not everybody has that good fortune.
And so for the garbage man or whoever who has a day job that they don't love, maybe that's what funds their passion on the off hours, and hopefully they didn't burn themselves out. I knew a woman who worked at Goldman Sachs and worked there for years and years and years. And she really was a singer. That was what she wanted to do. And on her off time, she sang constantly. She was a choir. And then 2008 happened. She was laid off and her pension was gone. And, she and I were sitting and having coffee and talking. And she was just like, why did I gave up so much for this false notion of stability. And my heart just broke for her.
Yeah.
But I also think that she did the right thing for her at the time, because it did fund her ability to go do all of this stuff in the moment. Maybe it didn't work out the way that she wanted it, but that's no guarantee for anybody, no matter what you do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I'm just thinking back, just, real quick version of my story. When I was a kid, I had a friend whose dad was a journalist, and he was a baseball writer. I loved baseball. My friend's dad got to travel with the Detroit Tigers and go to every game and write about it. And I wanted to do that, or I really wanted to be a journalist. My dad, who's an engineer, steered me towards engineering because I also had the math and science ability to pursue that. But thankfully, that's sort of like what you were describing about being able to incorporate teaching into the work you do now. I learned, well, as an engineer, you can still find things to write about. I'm not a professional journalist, but I get to scratch that desire to create and write. So I'm fortunate to have found a path to that. And I would hope listeners and others who are still trying to figure that out can find something the way you have, the way I have.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that business and the passion with Moxie. It seems like there are a couple of approaches that make your firm different. How would you summarize that, like the elevator pitch of before talking about some of the specific approaches and programs? Is it a matter of attitude or the way you go about things?
I think that it is the program that we follow. That's really what makes us different. And then also our attitude. But even before that, when people would ask me, so what's the difference between you and another bookkeeper? I'd be like, not much. It's essentially a personality flavor, like it's Coke versus Pepsi. It's really close. We do the same things, ideally, hopefully there's not a lot of leeway in bookkeeping. It either lines up or it doesn't. How you get there, you can take a couple of different paths. So for me, finding the profit first methodology was not only the system that I just think is so easy and elegant and beautiful, but also the differentiator.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to work with creatives, primarily service-based businesses, but we focus really especially on creatives, online business coaches. That sort of bleeds over into health and wellness a little bit. Every now and then we get a really creative attorney who's a collaborative thinker and a creative problem solver. And those people tend to fall into one of two camps. Either they know that their time is better spent on something other than the back office,
Mm-hmm.
or they're downright loathing that work and would rather, pull their hair out than do little numbers and little boxes. But they know they have to know where they stand financially. And so what I love about Profit First was that it answered the question that I think small business owners are always really asking, which is not, can you show me my P&L?
Mm-hmm.
But what can I afford to do this month? And so by separating out the money into these different bank accounts and assigning each one a purpose, they can then look at their bank balance and go, yep, I'm okay for the month. Or, I'm a little low. I better go figure out what's going on. Do I need to call in some collections? Do I need to go make some sales? What's up? But that what's up gives them the time and space to go figure it out and correct it before checks are bouncing,
Mm-hmm.
which is usually what happens, right? We live our lives, we go out, we try to get as many sales in as is reasonable and, hope that someone's kind of taking care of it and hoping that our accountant will figure it out for us at the end of the year. But that's not their job, right? Their job is to get you paying the least amount of tax legally possible to keep you in compliance.
Yeah.
And it's not really the bookkeeper's job either. Their job is to make sure that your books are perfect. So there's that whole middle zone where CFOs live in a large company that for small business really hasn't been even illuminated as a need that can be filled, much less actually filled.
So what I hear you saying is you're trying to proactively keep people out of business trouble as opposed to just reacting to it. At some point, maybe it's too late. You can't fix a bad cash position once you're into it, or it's difficult.
It's difficult. It's difficult. And even then, you need to have a plan, right? That was how I ended up in bankruptcy. That's how, 50% of businesses end up closing in the first couple of years. The statistic is 82% of those businesses that close cite cash flow as the reason. And that doesn't mean not making sales or not having a product or a service that people really want. It just means not having the money that you need when you need it.
Right.
And sometimes that's just one big tax bill at the end of the year that can really knock you out.
So when you say profit first, that doesn't mean profit only, because I think of as a business person myself, you've got profitability, but then there's cash flow, and there are many profitable businesses that have gotten into a cash crunch.
Yes. So profit first doesn't mean profit at any cost.
Sure.
It doesn't mean profit only. It's recognizing in a two-word kind of way, a very catchy way, that what profit is sustainability, growth, savings for emergencies, savings for needs, annual needs, etc. A lot of times it's also owner's pay. It's the tax payments. So the idea is just to flip the traditional accounting formula, sales minus expenses equals profit, where profit comes last, so that it's sales minus profit equals expenses. So once you set aside what you need to pay the government and what you need to set aside to make sure you protect that cash profit, that entrepreneurial profit, not the on paper accounting profit, and make sure you're setting aside a sustainable wage for yourself, then what's left over is what you can afford. Yeah. Now you don't need a budget spreadsheet that, has $100 a month for office supplies just because you want to make things balance and you're like, I don't need that. And now I don't know what to do with my budget.
And when you talk about having different accounts, is this a matter of thinking, like you're making me think about my own business here? There's payroll, there's ongoing operational expenses, and then maybe at some point there's the ability to spend money to invest in growth? Would you look at that as a separate bucket to make sure we're not investing in growth at the expense of some of the basics that we need to meet? Or is it very
Short
situational?
answer, yes. Short answer is if you're reinvesting the profit, that's not profit, that's an expense.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5 basic accounts in Profit First are an income account, so that you have all of your income flowing into a single place and you can begin to see the patterns. What are my peak seasons? What are my slow seasons? Do I get paid the first week of every month or the last week or something in between? Once you understand how the money flows in, you can then better plan when it should go out, right? So if I collect the vast majority of my income on the first week of the month, then I know that I can do all of my bill paying on the third week of the month, because that's close enough that I'm about to get that cup refilled. So we have an income account. We have a tax account where we put aside a percentage for estimated taxes and annual taxes.
Mm-hmm.
That is not our money.
Yeah.
It never was.
Do not touch.
Do not touch. Then we set aside money for, again, that cash profit, because so often I see business owners look at their profit and loss and say, well, this says that I made $80,000 last year. Where is it? It's not in my bank account. And I go, yeah, remember that credit card you carried over? Like, it went there and it went to pay down the loan and it went to pay you. And when you look at that, like, that's not very much money anymore, but you still have to pay tax on it, which is why we like to set aside that cash for taxes, and why we like to set aside the cash for profit, because that's then what we can use in case of a true emergency. We have our owner's pay, which is a holding account,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can pay ourselves the same amount out every 2 weeks, regardless of fluctuations in. We just have to make sure we're refilling that glass faster than we're drawing from it.
Right.
And lastly is our operating expense account. And so those are the basics. In my business, I separate out marketing. Some people separate out annual expenses, or, same thing. I know that I'm going to do a big push in a couple of months and I want to fund that account. One of the most interesting uses of an extra account that I've seen and suggest is when someone says, I want to come up with a new regular expense. For instance, I want to hire somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, okay, well, so how much about would you be paying them a month? Well, $5,000 a month. Okay, let's see if we can slice that out of your operating expenses now over to a new hire account.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can consistently fill that for 2 or 3 months at our target $5,000 a month, then we know we can absolutely afford that person. Mm-hmm. And we've got a cushion to do so. So that if the first hire doesn't work out, which is unfortunately the case sometimes, mm-hmm. we're not like, oh, now what? Now I invested all of this and now I'm broke and I can't afford to hire somebody else, but I still need somebody else. It's fabulous.
Yeah. Well, people can learn more about the Profits First system and the work at Moxie Bookkeeping. Final question here. Our guest, again, has been Ean Price Murphy. There's a free download available on Ian's website. I encourage people to go check it out. I'll link to it in the show notes. The 5 money myths. Can you give us just one? And leave the rest as we'll tease the other 4 for people to go and check out that download.
I think the one that pops to mind for this case specifically is that only successful people have this figured out. And I think it's quite the opposite. I think it's people who figure this out become successful. Mm. And so just because you don't think of yourself as good with math or good with numbers, or that you don't love bookkeeping, that's okay. You don't have to be the mechanic on your own car. That's what we've got experts for. But you have to have a system in place so that you can go back to paying attention to the things that you want to pay attention to and know that everything else is running smoothly.
And so the myth there is, say that one more time, because I think there was an interesting twist there. I just want to ask you to repeat that.
The myth is only successful people have this stuff figured out. And I believe that it is figuring it out is what makes you successful.
Yes, that's a good twist. And it reminds me of, just kind of the general theme of the podcast here, where sometimes people think, oh, they must be successful because they've never made mistakes. Well, no, I think quite the opposite is true. People are successful because they learn from their mistakes. And it sounds like you, as my other guests have, Ian, have that in your track record. I'll give you the last word because you reacted pretty strongly to that idea. What else do you have to say to that before we go?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like failure is a daily thing in a wonderful way.
Yeah.
Right? If we're not failing at stuff, we're not trying enough stuff. Failure is what tells you something's not working so that you can go find what does work. Maybe you happen upon it, but overnight successes take decades.
Then it just seems like overnight.
It just seems like
sometimes, yeah. Well, that's great. Well, Ian, thank you so much for being a guest, for sharing your story and your reflections, and great conversation with you. So again, Ean Price Murphy has been our guest from Moxie Bookkeeping. My mistake, I don't have it right in front of me, so I'll just ask you. The website is
moxiebookkeeping.com.
I would have guessed that, but I would have hated to be.
Then I would have said, early. No, that's wrong.
I would have. So, like you said, mistakes, daily thing, myself included. So, anyway, Ian, I hope you didn't think it was a mistake to be here on the podcast. It certainly wasn't a mistake to have you. So, thank you again.
Thank you.